The morning the town gathered for the wedding, even the sky seemed unwilling. A pale, colorless dawn stretched over Red Hollow, and the wind blew through the churchyard like a restless spirit. Dust drifted along the wooden steps as boots scuffed and murmurs rippled through the crowd. Folks weren't there to bless the union. They came to witness a spectacle. The preacher's hands trembled as he opened the Bible, and the bell above tolled slow and hollow. Clara May Hensley stood beside Elias Ward, her veil trembling not from joy but from the weight of being pitted. She'd waited 34 years for kindness that never came, and now she stood in a borrowed gown, marrying a man who could barely look her way. Elias, once the pride of the county, a rancher with strong hands and quiet eyes, looked now like someone cornered by his own past. His brother's gambling debt had left him half-ruined, and the sheriff had made this marriage his way out. "Let it be fair," Sheriff Dugan had said with a smirk. "You marry the woman the town left behind, and your land stays yours." The preacher spoke the vows, but the words felt like iron links in a chain. Elias's jaw tightened, his eyes fixed on the dirt between his boots. When it came time for the ring, his fingers fumbled, and the crowd chuckled softly. Somewhere, Lydia Crow whispered loud enough to be heard. Poor Spinster's dream finally came true, though not the way she hoped. Clara's lips trembled, but she said nothing. She just nodded, her eyes steady under the veil. When the preacher said, "You may kiss the bride," Elias only touched her hand for a breath, just enough to make it look proper. They rode from the church through the empty street, their shadows long across the dust. The horses' hooves echoed off the silent storefronts. Neither spoke. Elias stared at the road ahead, the reins tight in his grip. Clara sat stiff-backed, clutching her small brown suitcase like it was the last piece of her she could still claim. It wasn't until they were halfway across the prairie that he spoke. "You didn't ask for this either." Her answer came quiet, almost swallowed by the wind. "I'll earn my keep, Mr. Ward." He glanced at her, just once, and there was no bitterness in her tone, only a calm certainty that startled him more than tears would have to be. By the time they reached the ranch, the sun had dipped low, painting the dry hills copper. The house stood lonely against the horizon, boards faded, windows clouded. Elias dismounted without a word and went to stable the horses. Clara stepped down carefully, brushed the dust from her skirt, and carried her suitcase inside. The first thing she did was sweep the porch, not because he asked, because it was what she knew. The woman they called useless began her life of usefulness that very evening. Days turned to weeks, and the house became one of silence. Elias worked the fences by day and drank in the barn at night. Clara cooked, mended, fed the chickens, and said little. He avoided her eyes. She avoided his pity. When he came home muddy, his plate was already warm on the table. When she woke before dawn, his boots were lined neatly by the door. They lived like two ghosts haunting the same ground. Bound by paper, kept apart by pride that in town, the whispers grew crueler. Lydia Crow told anyone who'd listen that Clara's got herself a husband but no love to show for it, and that Elias Ward's house must be colder than a grave. But inside that house, quiet things began to shift. Clara started leaving a small cup of coffee on the porch rail before dawn, black and steaming. She never waited for thanks. He never said it. Yet every morning, it was gone. One afternoon, Elias came in and found his father's old photograph straightened on the mantel. It had fallen weeks ago and gathered dust. Now it gleamed clean. He stared at it for a long time, a heaviness pressing on his chest. Kindness, he would later think, can be the loudest silence in a house full of ghosts. Then came the rainstorm, the kind that darkens the sky so fast the chickens run for cover. Elias was up fixing the barn roof when the wind tore through, knocking him to the ground. He hit hard, shoulder twisted, pain sharp as lightning. By the time he stumbled into the house, soaked through, his pride hurt worse than his arm. Clara gasped when she saw him. "You're bleeding." "I can handle it," he snapped, voice thick with shame. But she was already fetching water, a clean cloth, thread. He tried to pull away, but she caught his wrist, firm, unshaking. "Please," she said softly, "let me do something right." The fire crackled low as she worked. Her hands were steady, the lamplight trembling across her face. He watched her. Not beautiful, maybe, but there was something in her eyes like steady weather after years of drought. "You've done enough," he muttered. but the edge in his voice was gone. "Not yet," she said. When she finished, she sat back quietly. The room smelled of smoke and wet wool. He flexed his arm, testing it. The pain dulled, but something else stayed. Something heavier, warmer. He watched her gather her things and stand. Before she turned away, he said quietly, "Maybe this ain't the worst thing that's happened to me." Her lips curved in the faintest, startled smile. And when he woke the next morning, a handful of wildflowers waited on the kitchen table, bright against the gray wood. Like something reborn. The town might have carried on with its gossip, but at the ranch, the air felt different, softer, like forgiveness had taken root in the dust. The weeks that followed moved like slow rivers after rain, quiet, steady, alive beneath the surface. The ranch began to breathe again. The fences were mended, the hens fattened, and flowers bloomed where weeds once ruled. Clara May moved through the house like a secret prayer answered. Soft footsteps, steady hands, small laughter at the smallest things. The townsfolk noticed, though none said it aloud. At the general store, Lydia Crow stirred her coffee and told anyone within earshot. "She's got him under her spell, that one." Men lose their minds when they marry pity. The others chuckled. But there was something forced in it now, because word had spread that Elias Ward had paid off his debts early, and that his ranch was thriving again. Sometimes Elias heard the whispers when he came to town. He didn't answer them anymore. He just tipped his hat and kept walking, his wife beside him. For the first time, he didn't walk ahead of her, he matched her stride. The same mouths that once mocked her now fell quiet when she passed. The dust under their boots carried no shame, only peace. Back at the ranch, small miracles unfolded unnoticed. The horse that hadn't let anyone near it now took apples from Clara's palm. The kitchen smelled of cinnamon bread in the mornings. Elias began to talk again. Not much, just a few words over supper, but the silence between them had changed its shape. It wasn't heavy anymore. It was full of things unsaid but understood. Autumn came, and with it, the county fair. The air turned crisp, banners fluttered, and fiddles played beneath the open sky. Elias hadn't planned to go, but Clara insisted. "You've been hiding too long," she said gently, tucking her hair into a neat braid. "Let them see the man I see." At the fairground, people turned to look as they arrived, some curious, some surprised. The sheriff clapped Elias on the shoulder. "Good to see you, Ward. Maybe you'll show the young uns how to tame a horse proper." The challenge was plain. Lydia smirked behind her fan. Elias hesitated. His arm, though healed, still ached in the cold. Clara's hand brushed his lightly. "Do it," she whispered. "For yourself." He stepped into the ring, hat low, rope in hand. The young stallion before him was wild-eyed and mean-tempered. The crowd jeered when Elias stumbled once, twice. Lydia's voice cut through the noise. "Better let your wife handle it, Elias. Seems she's the one wearing the spurs at home." The laughter stung, but before he could answer, Clara was already stepping forward. Her voice was calm as still water. "Let me try." The crowd went quiet, then murmured. No woman had ever dared. But Clara didn't seem to hear them. She walked slowly toward the horse, speaking low, her hands steady. Dust rose around her skirts as the animal snorted and stamped, but she didn't flinch. Her voice, soft but certain, carried over the ring. "Easy now. Ain't nobody here to hurt you." Minutes passed. The stallion's muscles quivered, his breathing slowed. Clara reached out and laid a hand on his muzzle. Silence fell so deep that even the wind seemed to listen. The horse bowed his head. For a long, stunned heartbeat, no one moved. Then the crowd erupted, not in laughter this time, but awe. The sheriff took off his hat. Elias just stood there, eyes shining, chest tight with something he hadn't felt in years, pride. That night, the fire came. It started with a dropped lantern in the barn, a careless gust of wind. Flames caught the dry hay like it had been waiting for the spark. Clara woke first to the crackle and the smell of smoke. By the time she shook Elias awake, the walls glowed red. He shouted for her to stay inside. But she was already out the door, running into the inferno. The horses screamed inside. Elias followed, the heat blistering his skin. The fire roared like an angry god, devouring everything it touched. Through the smoke, he saw her, her figure bent, struggling to untie the panicked animals. "Clara!" He shouted, but the sound vanished in the blaze. A beam crashed between them. He fought through, arm bleeding, throat raw, until he found her trapped beneath a fallen plank. For the first time, fear, not pride, ruled him. He tore at the wood with his bare hands until it gave. He dragged her out, coughing, gasping, both collapsing in the dirt. Rain began to fall then, sudden, hard, and wild, as if the heavens had been holding their breath for this moment. The fire hissed and sputtered, turning to steam. Elias gathered her in his arms, trembling. "Don't you die on me," he whispered against her hair, but she only smiled faintly, eyes glassy but alive. "Told you I'd earn my keep." They sat there until the fire was gone, their bodies streaked with ash, their hearts stripped bare. When the town came the next morning, they expected ruin. Instead, they found the couple standing side by side amid the smoldering wreckage. The barn was gone, but the horses lived, and so did they. Clara's dress was torn, her hands bandaged, but she stood tall. Elias turned to the sheriff and the townsfolk gathered behind him. His voice cracked, but carried clear. "This ranch stands because of my wife. And so do I." The silence that followed was the sweetest sound the prairie ever held. Lydia lowered her eyes. The sheriff nodded once. The people of Red Hollow said nothing, but something in them shifted that day. Respect replaced ridicule. Winter came and went. By spring, the ranch was rebuilt. The new barn stood stronger than before, the fields greener. On quiet evenings, Clara sat on the porch, sewing under the soft hum of crickets. Elias would sit beside her, mending a saddle, the sunset painting them both in gold. They didn't need many words. Sometimes she'd hum a hymn. Sometimes he'd tell her about the horses or the crops. The silence between them was golden now, alive with peace, not emptiness. One afternoon, a rider from town passed by, tipped his hat, and called out, "Evenin', Mrs. Ward." Clara smiled softly, eyes following the sun as it sank behind the hills. "Evenin'," she called back. The breeze lifted her hair, carrying the scent of wild sage and old earth. Elias looked at her then, really looked, and saw not the woman he'd been forced to marry, but the woman who had rebuilt his world from ashes. Sometimes love doesn't announce itself. It grows quietly, plank by plank, until you realize you've built a life around it. And maybe that's what grace is, not the absence of hardship, but the courage to bloom in its shadow. They forced them to marry, yes. But what the town forgot was this: you can't force grace. You can only give it space to grow. And when it blooms, it humbles even the cruelest heart. So if you ever find yourself mocked or unloved, remember the story of Red Hollow's old maid, and the man who learned that strength doesn't always shout. It sometimes whispers, steady as her voice did, through smoke and storm. "Easy now. Ain't nobody here to hurt you."